Welcome to Factual America. I'm your host, Matthew Sherwood. This week it is my pleasure to welcome Nick Sweeney and Stacey Reiss, the filmmakers behind the HBO Max documentary, Santa Camp. Here's the trailer.
I say Santa, you say Claus. Santa! Claus! Santa! Claus! The New England Santa Society created a school called Santa Camp. It's starting to become more visible, and we're starting to do much more promotion of it. The issue we run into is that people just have a very specific idea of what Santa should look like. So, we have a lot of new Santas.
I want to be able to be Black Santa for other families. I'm going to be going up to New Hampshire to learn all the ins and outs of being Santa. Oh, it's definitely going to be a strange experience.
Levi is transgender.
Oh, Santa Levi, aka Trans Santa here.
They're all white.
I am excited for Santa Camp.
There you go, Santa fan.
This is the type of people that I live around. All of a sudden, we got a problem with Black Santa.
Have you always seen Santa as being white?
Yes, I wish there was like a variety of Santas that come in any different shape and form, you know?
I have never been asked by a child, how come Santa isn't black like me? Kids don't see color.
I'm Dr. Claus, like I am not the wife.
Let me ask, how about pay?
I say Santa is 75 cents and Mrs. Claus, you can add her in for a quarter.
The doctor said he'd never walk and talk.
I want to show everyone that I am the real Santa.
It's his dream.
Our church has been getting emails, phone calls, typical hate messages.
This church is infected.
This is a ploy to steal, kill, and destroy somebody's identity.
We don't know if they have weapons. Yeah, kind of scary.
It doesn't matter. God created no junk. Whether they're gay, white, Jewish, black, just doesn't matter.
I needed to channel the anger into something that wasn't negative.
Hey! No, it's okay.
I am not the warm-up act for Santa. Now it's my turn.
People need to see themselves in role models.
Dasher, Dancer, Prancer, Vixen. Santa Claus is just an idea. A child wants somebody who looks like them. What's the problem?
If I saw a Trans Santa when I was a kid,
It would have made a difference for you.
yeah.
That's it. It's Santa.
That was the trailer for the HBO Max documentary, Santa Camp. And this is Factual America. I'm your host, Matthew Sherwood. Each week I watch a hit documentary and then talk with the filmmakers and their subjects. Every summer, a horde of professional Santas, Mrs. Clauses, and elves descend on a campsite in the New Hampshire woods to learn the tricks of the trade. But this year is different at Santa Camp. Join us as we talk with Stacey and Nick about how Santas are adapting to a modern world and embracing inclusivity. We also find out what it is like to work on a Christmas documentary and ask the question, can you ever get tired of Santa? Stay tuned. Nick Sweeney, Stacey Reiss, welcome to Factual America. How are things with you, Stacey?
Good, thanks for asking.
Yeah, and Nick?
I'm great. Thank you for having us. It's almost the beginning of December, so it's Christmas time, Santa time.
Well, I mean, we wanted to have you on, but, there's even another reason to just be discussing Santa. It's a seasonal topic. To remind our listeners and viewers, we're talking about Santa Camp. It premiered in November on HBO Max, and is it showing anywhere else? I mean, because I know HBO Max isn't global quite. Do we, or are there plans in the works for wider distribution?
So right now it's on HBO Max in all of the territories where HBO Max is available, and then in Australia it's on Foxtel and Binge, and in Canada it's on Crave.
Okay.
And there is a UK broadcast coming, but we don't have the details of that just yet.
Okay. Well, people can search it online and I'm sure find it if they're not in one of the HBO Max territories. I'm not, but I benefited from having a screener, obviously, so thank you for sharing that. And welcome and congratulations on getting this film made. And Nick, maybe you can start us off for our listeners who haven't had a chance to see Santa Camp. What is Santa Camp all about? Maybe give us a bit of a synopsis.
Santa Camp is about a actual, real summer camp for Santa Clauses that exists in the woods of New Hampshire every year. About 100 Santa Clauses and Mrs. Clauses and elves get together and learn the tricks of the trade. And in the film, we see that the Santa Society that runs this summer camp, last year for the first time, they had been getting requests for Santas from different backgrounds, Black Santas and LGBTQ plus Santas and so on. Right. And so they set out to address Santa's diversity problem by inviting Santas from different backgrounds. And so the film follows the Santa Society as well as the unconventional clauses as they head to camp and then as they head out into the world.
It's the clear and present danger for us. I needed to channel the anger into something that wasn't negative. So I went and rented a Santa costume and played Santa Claus for my daughter.
Down and across.
I want to be able to be Black Santa for other families. So I'm going to be going up to New Hampshire to a Santa camp to learn all the ins and outs of being Santa.
This is what I created.
Okay. Now, I'm a bit older, but I do have children, but I was a little surprised. I mean, what I remember as a kid is that it was always just some guy who donned a wig and a beard, even in the shopping mall. It wasn't, but professional Santas. I mean, these guys are, who are, they really take these things seriously, don't they, Stacey?
Yeah, I think probably even in the mall for you as a kid, it wasn't just some guy with a wig and a beard. I think that most of these Santas take their role seriously. On a serious note, it's they're interacting with children, they're setting an impression, they have this tradition to uphold. And on a lighter note, these are the Santas that we met, at least, they're all natural performers. And so, they want to put on a great show and they sure do.
Yes. They do. I think the film does that extremely well in terms of the, especially I love the intro of the film where it just, the one Santa and all the different crying and screaming children and the lovely children and the older children and different people, this, as you say, this sort of image and institution, really, that they are trying to uphold. But
it's actually two Santas that you thought was one Santa, and that was a real problem in the making of the film because people kept thinking that all of the Santas were the same person. We see early in the film that one of the Santas, named Santa Dick,
that's right,
passes away, and people were confused because they thought that he then reappeared after he had passed away later in the film, and it's a real challenge trying to make the audience be able to distinguish between the different Santa Clauses, because there's about 100 different Santa Clauses in this movie, and it's interesting. In the opening sequence, it's actually multiple Santas.
Is it? Oh well, you see, that's the thing, and it shows you what you do focus in on, right? On something like that, and it's a good point, and it's actually what the film's also. You're probably going to tell me about as well, that it's because the traditional Santas have an image that they are aiming for. They do look, at first glance, look all the same, don't they? It's how was that? How was that? What was it like hanging out with these guys, and how did you keep them? Did you become confused at times?
Definitely, there are a couple of Santas that are just absolute dead ringers for each other. I mean, these guys are the real deal Santas. They look like this all year round. At Christmas, they have, the traditional velvet cloak and fur and boots with bells on it. But even in the middle of summer, they're still wearing what they call Santa casual, which is like Hawaiian shirts with Christmas trees on them, or like red hats. Like they're never not Santa, to the point where like some of the Santas would complain that like they couldn't drink in public, or they couldn't like pee at a urinal, or they couldn't like give somebody the finger if they cut them off at a traffic light, because then they would be destroying the magic of Santa. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of inescapable for these guys. They love being Santa, but also they kind of don't have a choice because they look like Santa no matter what they do.
Well, and I guess it becomes self-reinforcing. Once you become Santa, then you got to look even more like Santa, and so you've got to pack on the weight and grow the beard more and all that. I mean, why, Stacey? Why do these guys do it? Because to me, it seems like it might be a thankless job.
I mean, on one hand, it pays quite well. So it is, that is a motivation. But I think for many of them, that isn't what motivates them. I think it's the interaction with families and with children. And it's, building these memories. And they could spend hours and hours and hours. And you see this in the campfire scene a little bit, where they tell us tales of meeting different kids and teenagers and what happens. And I think it's that's what keeps them doing it, is the magic of it.
Okay. And what do they learn at Santa camp? I mean, or is this kind of an excuse for a bunch of old guys to hang out and drink beers around a campfire?
They learn like extremely dense curriculum, and it was a real challenge filming the camp, because there's like consecutive classes running in like different venues,
right,
spread across this gigantic campsite. We had to get around in golf carts and use walkie-talkies just to communicate with each other. They learn things. I mean, all of the courses have very funny names, like perfecting your persona, and like things like clause couples, and
right.
like what else? Like preparing for the sleigh. Yeah, like they take it really seriously. It is like a university, and they get certificates at the end of it. And what's really funny in the film is you see, like, in some of these seminars, the instructors are asking them questions, and the Santas are kind of nervous about answering. Like, there was one moment that's quite funny where the instructor is like, "What do you say if a kid asks if you're the real Santa? What do you say? Anybody, anybody, anybody?" And the Santas are too afraid to volunteer an answer because they don't want to give the wrong answer. Right. And what actually happened in that moment was the Santa with a disability named Finn. He communicates via a talker, and he volunteered, like, I tell them I'm the real Santa, and that was the correct answer. Like, that is what you're meant to say. Yeah. That's the only correct answer according to the Santa Society.
Yeah. And did you learn any tricks of the trade that you didn't know before going in? Are there like secrets that they,
There's a lot of secrets. I think they prepare their backstory well in advance, because they really get interrogated by the children. The kids being like, if you're the real Santa, what's my name? And so they need to always have answers for that. One of the other things that was really interesting, and was kind of part of the reason why the Santa Society was becoming more diverse, is that the Santas had been getting, they'd been interacting with kids, I guess, who were starting to think about their gender identity. And so the Santas were getting requests from boys for Christmas toys that are like traditionally associated with girls. Like, for example, boys were asking for dresses or for easy bake ovens, and the same the other way around. They were having girls that were asking for GI Joes. And I think the Santas had felt kind of unprepared for that. Like, they hadn't really had to think about those things as much as they do now, and they were making an effort to be prepared for that, and to not be judgmental, and to have answers ready for kids who ask that, so that they don't come across as unprepared or judgmental, or those types of things. So they really have to be prepared. Like, it's a lot of pressure, and if they mess it up, then there's a lot at stake.
Yeah. I think that actually we're going to take an early break. let our sponsor have a word, but we'll be right back with Nick Sweeney and Stacey Reiss, director and producers of Santa Camp, HBO Max documentary that premiered in November of this year. You're listening to Factual America. Subscribe to our mailing list or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at Alamo Pictures to keep up to date with new releases or upcoming shows. Check out the show notes to learn more about the program, our guests, and the team behind the production. Now back to Factual America. Welcome back to Factual America. I'm here with Nick Sweeney and Stacey Reiss, the filmmakers behind Santa Camp. It's the HBO Max documentary streaming now. We were just talking about Santa Camp, and some of the issues or things that some of the older Santas were beginning to have to tackle with children. I mean, did this start out as a film about Santa Camp, or how did this all come about? What drew you to making a film about Santa Camp, and how did you find out about this story?
I was actually just curious about how Santas learn to be Santa. I was, when I first started thinking about it, I was like, do they get a certificate? Do they go to college? Like, do they get background checked? And so I started looking into it and found that there were a couple of different Santa schools in America, 3 big ones. But one of them actually ran a summer camp. And as a filmmaker, I was just kind of like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Like, how could it exist? How has nobody done anything about this? And like, do they sleep in bunk beds, or is it like a lake? Like, I was just, my mind was spinning just with how interesting visually it could be. And so I reached out to the organizers of the camp, and I'd asked them, obviously everything about it sounded surreal and fascinating. But I was like, is anything different? Like, are there any changes that are happening in their industry? And the founder of the New England Santa Society and the person who was behind Santa Camp, Santa Dan, said that they had been getting more requests for Santas from different backgrounds, and that they didn't have, many diverse Santas in their ranks. And so they had been looking to do outreach. And he'd also said that within the Santa Society, some of the Mrs. clauses had been becoming increasingly vocal in calling for equal billing and equal pay, because, many of the Mrs. clauses had felt like they were overlooked. And so when I heard that, I was kind of like, oh, wow. So here is this kind of microcosm in which these huge issues around representation and equality are starting to play out. And this was at the end of 2020. So a lot of these conversations were happening everywhere, not just within the Santa community, but in all workplaces and all industries. And so I was really interested in that. But we didn't know how successful they'd be. We were curious about how the Santas would respond to this, but it was when they started to actually do outreach to Santas from different backgrounds that it got really interesting, and that kind of tension between the old guard and the new, and this how can one of the most beloved traditions adapt to a changing America and changing world? Like, those were very interesting questions that started to bubble up.
So these subjects so you have these 3 main subject. Well, there's more than 3, but there are these there's Chris, who's the African American Santa, and then how did you so this is sort of totally organic. You weren't, they were already in conversations with the society about coming to camp, and then you happened to be there when this all happened. Is that how it worked out?
So we follow, there's basically kind of 5 main clauses. There's Santa Dan, who's the organizer of the camp. There is Diane, who is a professional Mrs. Claus. Right. There is Santa Finn, who is a Santa with spina bifida, and his mom, Suki. There's Santa Chris, who is a father in Little Rock who received a racist letter in response to his Black Santa Christmas decorations, and in response to that, he decided to train to become a Santa. And then there is Santa Levi, who's a transgender Santa, and his partner, Heidi, aka Dr. Claus.
I think Sometimes you just worry that you're going to say the wrong thing and offend somebody. You know, you're just not sure how to deal with those situations. Especially today in today's politically correct world and cancel culture and everything. You're just so afraid what to say.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. I'm Suki. Hi. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
We've tried to really work on just making ourselves more familiar with what's going on. And I mean, we were talking today on another topic, but just the whole pronouns issue. That for us old guys, it's like, my pronoun? What's, things have really changed recently in acknowledging the gender issues.
Gender issues? And I was like,
Yep.
they're trying, but there's some other verbiage we could use other than like issues.
So many of them were already in touch with the Santa Society. They had already they'd approached the Santa Society about coming to camp. They had already done some gigs. And then some of the other people were people that had online presences. For example, Chris or Levi had online profiles because they had been doing Santa gigs. And so the organizers of camp reached out to them. And then, we also reached out to them to see if they were okay with filming. And so that's how the kind of ensemble came together. But there are a lot of characters in there, and they're from all over America. Chris is in North Little Rock, Arkansas, and then the members of the Santa Society are dotted all up and down the East Coast. So it was a logistical challenge, covering these types of stories, especially coming up the back of COVID. There was a lot of travel in this and a lot of big events.
I mean, not that this would be the normal reference that people would think of, but it did remind me briefly a bit of a Santa version of Boys State. I mean, because you've got all these different groups coming. You go to, like you say, you go to North Little Rock. I don't know where Levi lives, but I think
he's in Chicago. But Boys State is an interesting reference. Also, Spellbound is another film that kind of has people from all over the place. And interestingly, Boys State was actually, we really kind of did everything we could to study how they captured the events of Boys State, because it was a similar thing. It was a very condensed schedule where people were coming from all over the place to a thing where everything is happening within a short period of time. And so we did do some reading of how Boys State, or how the cinematographer had attacked that. And it was helpful for us.
I think they had more crew than you did, but I have a feeling, I don't know, but I think you did very well with what you were able to capture, because you've got them all, like you said, you follow them all the way up until they get there and everything. So it's interesting, because we've had the people from the filmmakers behind Boys State on as well, and that's it was quite a challenge. So I imagine was that your biggest challenge, Stacey? Do you think
I was going to say, I've actually worked with one of the cinematographers on Boys State quite a bit. So I was able to ask him sort of, how they were able to not miss any moments, because clearly that was the challenge for Nick and for myself, particularly in the scenes at camp. So we had multiple units at camp because there were so many people and so many sessions happening, and walkie-talkies and golf carts. And it was very, very carefully scheduled so that we all had our own, units and didn't miss anything. Because as you can imagine, we want to get each of those people arriving. We want to see them interacting with the other campers, and then, not miss any of the key moments, like the campfire scene or when they do their parade through camp. And then the other challenge was at the holiday season. So here we have, 5 main, protagonists in the film, and, Christmas Eve is one day and Christmas is one day. And it's like, well, wait a second, how are we going to be in all these different states with different people at the same time? But lucky enough for us that, the Christmas season really extends from about Thanksgiving through Christmas here, through New Year's here. Yeah. And each of the different people had their key events at different times. So we were able to be in those communities at different times in December and also not miss any of the key moments.
That's right. I mean,
We were definitely really scared, though. I remember there was like a solid month where I was convinced that like everything was going to be cancelled because it was, COVID was still kind of coming up, and
I mean, Omicron was on its way, wasn't it?
I think
We
Stacey's
really
much more
dodged
level-headed.
COVID. I mean, it was like we could tell you stories of Nick and I. Like I felt like sometimes it was like right in the rear view mirror behind us everywhere. So we were very lucky, and I think the film really is. I think it will hold up for so many reasons, but also when you watch the film, we're lucky that people aren't, really wearing masks, or it's not obvious that it was a very arduous process to film this during COVID.
Yeah. No, that's a very good point. I mean, were you surprised? Because in terms of how things played out at camp, I mean, you never know what you're going to get a lot of times with these sort of situations. But sort of the reactions of the old time. Well, no, it's not just the old timers; it's also the people who were coming for the first time, and then from other different communities and their reactions. Did anything really surprise you about how that all played out, without giving too much away to the to the audience, and no spoiler alerts here, but how did that play out? Was it as expected?
I think that at camp, a lot of the Santas that were there had never really thought about a lot of these issues previously. Like they hadn't really thought about how Santa does tend to be old, fat, white, and they hadn't thought about what it would mean to kids from different backgrounds to see themselves in Santa. And so I think that there was a little bit of tension between the kind of, the old guard and the new guard, and you see that play out in certain scenes in the film. But I think overall, it was a very positive experience. And I also think that sometimes you do see the old guard kind of struggling with some of these ideas a little bit, like wanting to say the right thing, but not being sure about what they're meant to say, and worrying about getting things wrong. And I think it's really relatable. Like, I think we all go through that, and we all think about that. And no matter how hard we try to be perfect and to be great allies or to be inclusive and welcoming, we all get it wrong occasionally, and you see that in the film. And I think that actually makes it more relatable to an audience and more human, because if we didn't include those things that happened, some of them might be considered to be microaggressions. It wouldn't have felt realistic. It would have felt like this kind of magical fantasy land where everybody says the perfect thing 100% of the time, which is not the real world.
Right, or you could even have the opposite, right, where it was just everything went horribly wrong, and everyone's resisting or whatever. I mean, it's just kind of, it just seems, as you say, it's very natural. It's very, as you say, it's something we all maybe even don't even consciously realize it, but it's something that we all struggle with, obviously.
And I think we all make those types of little mistakes in our day-to-day lives, but usually we don't have a camera following us, and so we kind of get away with saying something that's not quite right. But yeah, I certainly think that it was overall a very positive experience for all of the unconventional clauses.
I was also going to say that I think what's great about it is that it's funny, and you can use humor to tap into these issues. And so I think everyone is able to sort of make a mistake, but then also laugh at themselves. And I think that's really helpful. I mean, I wish that sort of happened in the real world more, where someone made a mistake, and then they could learn and laugh at the same time, and it wasn't just so divisive.
Well, and now that we are a year on, basically, as Christmas approaches, any updates on some of the main on the characters? This 5 main characters. Is it because you finish it? We see them going out and being performing their Santa duties last year. I guess that is they must be in full swing at the moment. Is that carrying on as far as you know?
There are so many updates. I'm gonna try to remember the top ones from the last couple of weeks. The Santa Chris, the black father from Arkansas, has booked, he says, around 250 gigs since becoming a clause, and that's, you know, only in 2 Christmas seasons, which is massive. I mean, that's a huge amount of demand for a Santa. His calendar is completely booked out.
Wow.
Santa Finn, who is a Santa with spina bifida, since the film came out, they've actually been getting messages from people all around the world, places like Australia and, you know, all corners of America, from other Santas who are disabled, which I think is incredible. They received a message from a Santa who was deaf, saying that he had thought that, you know, he didn't have much of a future as a Santa, but seeing Finn's story was very inspiring to him. And there was also a Santa who has epilepsy who had reached out to them, and he also had thought that his disability could potentially preclude him from, you know, reaching full flight as a clause, and that he said that seeing Finn's story really inspired him. And all of them have their own updates, but another one that I actually saw, because I occasionally check the Facebook group for the Santa Society, was that another of the Mrs. Clauses, one of the issues that comes up in the film is the Mrs. Clauses asking for equal pay and equal billing. And there was a Mrs. Claus on the message board saying that this year, for the first time, she's asking for equal pay. And she had 2 gigs that she normally does, and one had agreed to equal pay, and she was waiting to find out about the other one. So it certainly has like made ripples in the Santa world.
I mean, that's an interesting point we hadn't talked about previously, because there's a lot. I mean, you know, I've harkened on these a few of these characters, but there are things there that, like, I would have just assumed it was equal pay, right? I mean, but it's obvious that it hasn't been. I mean, they've been getting. In particular cases, you know, half, right, or less than what some of the main Santas get in terms of an appearance.
It's interesting that you would assume that, because we still don't have equal pay in the real non-Santa world. So, you know, I think that, like we, you know, were saying earlier, that a lot of these same issues, even though it's, you know, in Santa land, which, you know, maybe isn't real, they are the same real issues that, you know, women and people are facing in professional life today.
Yeah. No, and I hopefully I'm aware of. I think it's just because I thought with, you know, I always think of them as a pair, as one, and, you know, you get one, you get the other, you know, and they would be that there would even be this kind of, how best to put it, negotiations around hiring Santas, right? I'm sure, which happens all the time, and that, as you say, and what is obviously in your film shows is that, they disputes within the community, let alone trying to get people to pay them what they are worth.
One of the funny moments in the film is when the Mrs. Clauses are doing what's called a clause couples seminar. And one of the Mrs. Clauses says that in terms of the negotiation of the fees, like, that she's heard a client will ask for Santa and Mrs. Claus, and the Santa will say it's going to be $150, and then the client will say, well, what if we don't have Mrs. Claus? Will it be cheaper? And then the Santas will be like, oh, well, if we don't have Mrs. Claus, it's going to be $200, as a way of, like, you know, getting the clients to agree to book the Mrs. Claus, and that she should be, you know, paid equally and given attention. So they have all sorts of tricks for kind of negotiating.
Yeah. So both of you, I mean, now you've spent a lot of time with Santas, and you've made this great film. And how does this whole experience make you feel about Christmas? Are you a bit tired of it? Because you're like living Christmas year round for a year or two, weren't you? I don't know, and it must be tough coming into another Christmas season. I don't know. How has it made you feel?
Well, I'm happy that this Christmas season I will spend it with my family. I have 2 children, and last Christmas I was not around very much, and, you know, they knew this going into it, and they like love the film and are extremely proud of it. But I'm happy to have Christmas off this year.
Yeah. And you, Nick?
I'm definitely, like, it's weird. I feel like I've already experienced like 12 months of Christmas, and I had this weird experience like yesterday or the day before where, you know, the film's been out for about a week and a half, and we got a bunch of media requests from CNN and USA Today, and I was like, oh, that's right. Christmas season hasn't even started yet. Like I was already like, Christmas is over and so on. And then
Right.
yeah, these requests came through, which reminded me of the fact that 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 Christmas is only just getting started, and I'm definitely claused out. But it's a wonderful experience to make something that that makes people laugh and cry, which is what a lot of people have been saying on social media, that they're kind of ugly crying over Santa Camp. And so that's been a nice feeling, and it's nice to make people feel emotions.
Well, I
which is
can
what Santa
say
does.
what's exactly, and I will say I did a quick Google for Black Santa, and the amount of merchandise now that comes up is absolutely amazing. Because it's one whole scene with there, as you've already alluded to, there was obviously this horrible racist letter that he receives because he's got a black Santa in his front yard. But yeah, you can deck out your whole house in black Santas if you wanted to. So that was actually really quite lovely to see. So.
And also in commercials, like Oreo, I think maybe it's the first year that they've had a Black Santa in their Christmas commercial. The Christmas commercials are like a big deal.
Yeah.
They're like Super Bowl commercials. And so I think that, seeing that representation is very meaningful to people. And of course, along with that, there are some very ugly comments on social media about, the Oreo commercial and even about Santa Camp. Like there are some pretty horrifyingly racist things that we've seen online about it, and transphobic, bigoted comments, and which is confronting, but overwhelmingly, it seems like it's moving towards more representation, which is a good thing.
Well, I don't want to end on a bad note, but have you been have you had any? Have you guys faced threats? I know while filming, you must have. There's obviously a scene with the Proud Boys showing up, and it looks like it had the potential to get. Well, I guess you'd probably say it was already quite ugly, but it could get even uglier. How was that filming, and now, as you say, with some of the reaction?
I don't think either of us. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Stacey.
I was just going to say that I'm very happy that we were able to carry on with the event and keep everyone safe. That was obviously our primary concern, especially with young children and families coming to that event. So, that was great, but it was definitely a scary shoot. We hired private security, and we learned after the fact that there had been undercover cops circling the church where this was taking place. But for the people who, were at the event, like Levi and Heidi and the families, they really had no idea. They were able to really celebrate and be themselves, which was what we wanted. So I think that, had that event been canceled, hate would have won. And I think that what this film proves, no matter how many negative comments are out there, is that, love and celebration, and it will triumph in the end. And I think that we're already seeing a lot of change. And I think that all these clauses can be, they can, light the fire for change in each of their communities, but really then it'll kind of ripple out, hopefully around the world.
Okay. Well, I sure hope you're right, and I think you probably are. So I think we are coming up to the end of our time together, but maybe both of you, what's next in for you all? Nick, what's your next project, or can you tell us about it? Most of filmmakers on here say, "Oh, I can't really say anything," but maybe you might be different. Do you have a project in the works?
I do have a project in the works, but I, like many of the other filmmakers that come on the podcast, I can't say what it is. I will say that when I started making Santa Camp, I actually didn't think it was going to be a particularly controversial documentary. I thought it would be accessible for the family and Christmassy, and it ended up having a lot of very controversial elements to it. And the next project that I'm working on, I'm also, I'm intending to make something kind of accessible and fun, but as with Santa Camp, it could end up being, a little provocative.
Well, you just never know.
You never know. You really never know. When I think Stacey and I first talked about doing the documentary, we really had no idea of the twists and turns that it would take. We never thought that we'd be standing face to face with the Proud Boys, and we never thought that the clauses that we would be following would have such extraordinary things happen to them. You know, the highs and the lows. Like, there's just so much that happens in the film, and so you really never know. And I think you can kind of imagine it, and it will always end up being completely different to what you set out to make.
Well, and that's what makes it so wonderful, and it's also why, though you don't have any, why so many filmmakers have gray hairs, probably, because you just never know how that's going to turn out. How about you, Stacey?
Well, I came off producing a big series that's on Netflix right now, the Andy Warhol Diaries. So,
wow,
that was a massive project, and Santa Camp, and now I'm in the development stage, just developing a lot of different ideas. So, there's no set next thing. I mean, these two have kept me quite busy for this past year.
Okay, well,
maybe something about the Easter Bunny. Stacey, what do you think?
No Easter Bunny.
No Easter Bunny.
I'm trying to think Christmas is our only holiday documentary for now.
Well, that's a good point. How many holiday documentaries are there? You know, you think about it, they're churning out all kinds of Christmas stuff every year, other holiday, but you know, it's not one that documentaries have really. Christmas might show up in a documentary, but it's never a focus or a catalyst, is it?
No, I hope this is going to be on the holiday watch list every year. You know, every year, you know, people, there's always the list of, you know, what you should watch this year at the holidays. And I love the idea that this is a documentary that people can watch with their kids. You can watch it, you know, any age. And I think, you know, really enjoy it, but also I think it can be very revealing.
Okay. All right. Well, I just want to...
There are so few holiday I was just going to say, like, there are so many Christmas movies.
Right.
They churn them out, you know, there's like a huge industry and there are very few Christmas documentaries. I think the ones that do exist are very, they don't have a huge amount of kind of drama to them, I guess. Like sometimes they're just about they're very family friendly or kind of G-rated. So maybe I hope other people do make holiday and Christmas documentaries.
But
or it could be Santa Camp for sequel.
Yes. Yeah. You see, you got a whole industry here. You've got not that you want to typecast yourself, but you're going to be the Christmas documentarian, and or not.
Quite possibly.
Yeah.
It would not be a bad path to go down, because this one has been very fun to make.
All right. Well, I can tell, and it's been a thrill and a joy to have you on. I really appreciate it. Just remind our listeners and viewers that we've been talking with Nick Sweeney and Stacey Reiss, the filmmakers behind Santa Camp, an HBO Max documentary that is streaming now, and do check it out. So thank you again, both of you, Stacey and Nick. It's been a joy having you on.
Thank you. Happy holidays, everyone.
Yeah, happy holidays. I mean, this is very timely. I feel like maybe we should have been wearing our Santa hats and all that stuff, but you know, people will have to wear their own while they're listening and watching this. So thanks again. I also would like to thank those who helped make this podcast possible. A big shout out to Sam and Joe at Intersound Audio in York, England. A big thanks to Amy Ord, our podcast manager at Alamo Pictures, who ensures we continue getting great guests onto the show and that everything otherwise runs smoothly. Finally, a big thanks to our listeners. Many of you have been with us for 4 incredible seasons. Please keep sending us feedback and episode ideas, whether it is on YouTube, social media, or directly by email. Please also remember to like us and share us with your friends and family, wherever you happen to listen or watch podcasts. This is Factual America, signing off. You've been listening to Factual America. This podcast is produced by Alamo Pictures, specializing in documentaries, television, and shorts about the USA for international audiences. Head on down to the show notes for more information about today's episode, our guests, and the team behind the podcast. Subscribe to our mailing list or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Alamo Pictures. Be the first to hear about new productions, festivals showing our films, and to connect with our team. Our homepage is alamopictures.co.uk.